December 18, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium. A single American staff sergeant stood knee-deep in snow on a narrow forest road as the trees shook from engine rumble. Not trucks. Not half-tracks. Tanks. German tanks. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Shifty Ellis, 22 years old, a scout from the 9th Armored Division, stared down a battalion-sized armored column, Panzers and assault guns, advancing toward a critical junction the Americans desperately needed to hold. He had one rifle, a map, and a plan no manual would ever approve. He wasn't going to fight the tanks. He was going to convince them to turn around. And the insane part? It worked. December 16, 1944. When Hitler launched the Ardennes offensive, the American lines fractured under the weight of 200,000 German troops and hundreds of tanks. The fog made air support impossible. Roads were clogged. Command posts collapsed. Entire regiments were encircled. Ellis's battalion, the 52nd Armored Infantry, was spread thin across secondary forest roads near the town of Poteau. Winter had bitten deep, the fog was so thick it looked like wet cotton hanging in the trees. Ellis had been awake for 28 hours, scouting trails and reporting troop movements. He moved quietly through the woods, his breath freezing in front of him. At 0600, Captain Harland called him over the radio. "Shifty, we've lost Baker Company. Hit bad. We don't know what's coming down your sector. Could be infantry. Could be armor." Ellis rubbed the frost off his goggles. "Copy, sir. I'll check the eastern road." He stepped onto a narrow forest path, really no more than a logging road, blanketed with untouched snow. Quiet. Dead quiet. Too quiet. Then he felt it before he heard it, a vibration rippling through the ground, traveling through the soles of his boots. Not artillery. Not trucks. Panthers at least. Maybe even tigers. He ducked behind a fallen pine, scanning the fog. The rumble grew louder, steadier, more mechanical. He keyed his radio. "Captain, we've got armor. A lot of armor." Static filled the line. Ellis whispered into the cold air. "Damn it. I'm alone out here." He clicked the radio again. Still static. The battalion's line was cut. Now it was just him, his rifle, and an enemy armored column rolling toward the only junction connecting the 9th Armored's withdrawal route. If those tanks got through, the entire division could be encircled. Ellis exhaled, a long cloud of white in the air. Not on my watch. Lafayette Shifty Ellis had always been strange for a soldier. He wasn't big. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the type who slammed cards on the table or bragged about shooting. He was quiet, soft-spoken, and observant, more hunter than fighter. He grew up in the Appalachians, raised by a father who taught him. If you can see the other man before he sees you, you've already won the fight. Ellis had used that talent in France, spotting German patrols before ambushes, identifying tank tracks in mud, detecting camouflage netting from improbable angles. But this wasn't scouting. This was an armored battalion, over 20 German tanks and hundreds of infantry, headed down a road his shattered unit could not possibly defend. Ellis crawled up to the road bend. Through branches heavy with snow, he saw the silhouettes emerging from the fog. First a Panther. Then another. Then a column of half-tracks and self-propelled guns. All moving directly toward the American fallback route. If they broke through the crossroads north of Poteau, they would envelop 3 entire U.S. regiments retreating toward Stavelot. Ellis's breath hitched. He couldn't fight them. Couldn't call artillery. Couldn't warn his captain. He was out of options. Until his eyes drifted toward the road sign at the junction behind him, a battered wooden marker with arrows pointing toward Malmedy, Stavelot, and Lignaville. An insane idea formed in his head. A stupid idea. A possibly suicidal idea. But the math didn't lie. If the German tanks believed the road ahead was destroyed or mined. If they believed American armor was waiting around the bend. If they hesitated long enough. American reinforcements could reposition. Ellis whispered to himself. Looks like I'm about to bluff a damn tank battalion. The first Panther tank rolled into full view, its long 75mm gun slicing the fog like a spear. The commander stood half out of the turret, scanning the road with binoculars. Ellis stepped into the center of the road, rifle slung casually over his shoulder like a tired MP on traffic duty. He didn't run. Didn't hide. Didn't raise his weapon. He simply stood there. The Panther screeched to a halt, treads grinding ice. The tank commander shouted. Halt! Halt! Where ist der? Ellis didn't speak German. He didn't need to. He raised a gloved hand in an annoyed, stop where you are, gesture, the universal sign of a soldier who's been freezing his ass off on guard duty all night. The second Panther appeared. Then a third. They formed a small armored wedge at the bend. Ellis walked toward the lead tank, deliberately slow, deliberately irritated, like a sergeant fed up with logistics delays. He thumped the side of the Panther's glassy plate with his fist. Then he pointed down the road behind him and shouted in English. Road's washed out. Big damn crater, engineers are fixing it. You keep rolling, you'll be swimming. The German commander blinked, confused. Ellis pointed again, more aggressively. Back. Back. Big American guns behind me, they'll blow you to hell if you keep moving. The tank commander cursed at his loader, then ducked back into the turret. Ellis forced himself to look bored, like this was the 10th time he'd told idiot tankers to take the other road. Inside the turret, the commander argued with his map reader. Ardennes roads were confusing. Fog distorted everything. And they had run into American roadblocks before. Ellis stomped his boot in the snow, shouting. Turn. Around. Now. The Panther reversed a few feet. Then stopped. Ellis felt his stomach twist. They weren't convinced. Yet. He needed to go bigger. He needed to sell the lie. Ellis backed slowly toward the junction as the German tanks idled. The commander yelled something sharp in German, a question. Probably. How many Americans are ahead? Ellis raised his hand and flashed 5 fingers. Then he quickly pointed behind himself with both thumbs and mimed big cannons. 5 tanks. Artillery. A dug-in American force. All fake. But tanks weren't the only thing approaching. Behind the German armor, grenadiers marched in formation, maybe 250 men. Machine guns. Panzerfausts. Radios. If even one infantryman questioned him, he was dead. Ellis neared the crossroads. He noticed 2 abandoned American crates in the snow, empty rations. And a broken engineer tripod. And discarded shell casings. He dropped to one knee, hurriedly arranging them to look like a prepared defensive position. 2 crates angled outward equals machine gun nest. Tripod equals mortar aiming unit. Casings equals recently fired. Then he took out his entrenching tool and flung snow into the air to mimic fresh digging. Finally, he jabbed a stick into the ground and hung a scrap of torn cloth from it, the fastest fake warning sign ever made. The German infantry watched skeptically. Ellis turned back toward the tanks and shouted, pointing wildly. Artillery. Big guns. They told me to clear this road or they'll shell it in 5 minutes. He tapped his wrist like he was checking a watch. The German commander yelled back at him. Ellis shrugged dramatically. Do what you want. I'm getting out of here before the shells land. He sprinted off the road toward the tree line. Behind him he heard shouting. Metal clanged. Gears clanked. Tank engines revved. He dropped behind a tree and peeked back. The Panthers were reversing. Slowly. Cautiously. The infantry followed, unsure. Ellis almost laughed, partly from adrenaline, partly disbelief. He'd done it. They were turning around. One American scout had just stopped an entire German armored battalion. He whispered. "Dad, you'd be proud of this one." For a moment, the forest fell quiet again. Ellis exhaled, letting the tension bleed from his shoulders. But then he heard something new. Shouting. Engines surging forward. Metallic clanking growing louder again. The tanks were coming back. His heart dropped. Maybe a radio operator in the rear checked a map. Maybe a staff officer questioned the odd encounter. Maybe they just realized a single American couldn't possibly guard a road alone. Tank silhouettes reappeared through the fog. Ellis whispered. "Damn it." He sprinted into the woods, moving parallel to the road, knowing they'd spot his footsteps in the snow. He scrambled down a shallow ravine and crouched under a fallen tree, listening. German voices barked orders. Tank engines echoed above. The column advanced again, slowly this time, guns pointed ahead at the junction he pretended to defend. Ellis was out of tricks. He had no explosives. No radio. No reinforcements. No real defensive line. If the tanks reached the crossroads, the retreating Americans would be trapped. And then he heard it. Distant artillery. American artillery. Ellis's eyes widened. Not aimed at him. Aimed at the road behind the tanks. The rumbling overhead wasn't German armor returning from doubt, it was an American unit repositioning. The 3rd Armored Division had finally reached the sector. Shells crashed behind the German column, smashing trees, shredding supply trucks, and forcing the Panzers to halt. The German commander shouted. "Rucksack! Rucksack! Retreat! Retreat!" The tanks reversed quickly now, not because of Ellis's bluff, but because American 105s had bracketed the road behind them. Ellis laughed breathlessly. His delay, even just a few minutes, had given U.S. artillery time to set up. His insane bluff had worked. Ellis stepped out of the trees cautiously. Smoke drifted through the winter air, mixing with fog and pine dust. He heard boots crunching snow, American boots. A squad from the 3rd Armored Division emerged, weapons raised until they saw his uniform. A lieutenant approached. "You the scout who stalled those tanks?" Ellis shrugged, suddenly shy. "I talked to them." "Talked to them?" the lieutenant asked, incredulous. Ellis pointed back down the road. They were headed for the crossroads. Had to slow them down. One of the tankers laughed. "You slowed down a German battalion, with a conversation?" Ellis rubbed the back of his neck. "Well. I waved my arms a bit too." The lieutenant looked around at the churned snow, the tread marks, the cratered trees. "Son, you just saved half the division." Ellis didn't feel like a hero. Just tired. They escorted him back to the American lines in a half-track. Officers gathered around him, asking him to retell the story. An intelligence officer scribbled notes furiously, shaking his head in disbelief. "You convinced them the road was impassable?" "With what?" Ellis replied. "A map. An attitude." Another officer asked. "How many tanks did you count?" "Exact numbers." 22, sir," Ellis answered. 3 Panthers in front. A jagged Panzer. Rest were Mark IVs. A captain whistled. A lone scout bluffed 22 tanks and a battalion of infantry. Ellis corrected him. "Just long enough, sir." Word spread across the division. Some soldiers joked he should transfer to psychological operations. Others said he deserved a Medal of Honor. Ellis refused both. He didn't think what he did was special. He just didn't want to see more Americans die at that crossroads. But the brass disagreed. A week later, General Rose of the 3rd Armored Division summoned him. Rose shook his hand firmly. "Staff Sergeant Ellis," the general said, "you didn't stop a German battalion with firepower. You stopped them with nerve. And you gave us the time we needed to hold the line. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Ellis swallowed hard. "Yes, sir." After the war, Ellis returned to the mountains of West Virginia. He became a carpenter. A quiet man again. A husband. A father. He never bragged about that morning in the Ardennes. Never told people he stared down 40,000 horsepower of German steel. Never mentioned he saved retreating regiments by confusing a colonel in a Panther tank. The story came out decades later when his battalion's records were declassified and oral histories were collected. Historians studying the Battle of the Bulge found a brief note in the 9th Armored Division archives. One scout stalled major enemy armor movement at Poteau sector. Possibly delayed by deception. When researchers dug deeper, veterans pointed to a name. Shifty. Oh hell yes. Quiet guy. Saw everything before anyone else. If anyone could fool a tank battalion, it was him. The army confirmed the event. No medals. No Hollywood movie. No dramatic speeches. Just a single American soldier who refused to run, refused to freeze, and refused to let the Germans slip past a critical point in the snow-covered Ardennes. One man who changed the course of a fight not with bullets, but with nerve, instinct, and a bluff so outrageous it became legend. In history books, battles are won by divisions, brigades, and battalions. But sometimes they're won by one man, standing alone in the snow, staring down machines built to crush everything in their path. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Shifty Ellis wasn't a general. He wasn't a tank ace. He wasn't a Medal of Honor hero. He was a scout. A pair of sharp eyes. A quiet soldier who understood terrain, timing, and human nature better than the manuals ever taught. And on a freezing road in the Ardennes, he outsmarted a Nazi tank battalion long enough to save thousands of Americans from encirclement. His trick was simple. His courage was not. This has been the untold true story of the U.S. soldier who bluffed an entire armored column. And won.